Okay, so a bit about the obesity per se. It's a global epidemic. I think there's no denying that more and more people are getting obese. Obesity is not really a new uh, something new. The this lady on the top, it was more than 25,000 years ago. Hippocrates said that for obese people should eat only once a day, take no baths, sleep on a hard bed, and walk naked as long as possible. There are some things true in that, and I would like to cover that later if there's time. He did come close to the truth how to treat obesity. This Daniel Lambert was once the fattest man in Britain, and the British physician in 18th century, he said that no age has seen more instances of corpulency than our own. At that time itself, he was feeling that people are getting very obese. This is the trend from 18th century onwards, from 1705. BMI of is right here line. Below that is thin. Between 20 and 25 is normal, and more than 25 is overweight. As you can see, the BMI has been slowly increasing since then, and right now it is most of the people, quite a large percentage of people are overweight. This is the 2020 data. Almost 40% of adults in the world are overweight or obese, and unfortunately, quite a lot of children are also. About 20% of them are also obese, and growing at about 5% per year. This is the spread of the obesity across the world, overweight and obesity across the world. As you can see, there are hotspots. The Middle East, where I am working right now, is one of the most obese places in the world. 5% obese, that slightly rich, but it is the spread uneven. The share of deaths attributed to obesity is slightly different. You can see, although US was very obese, that there are not that many people dying there. India was 5% obese, but the death rate is about 7.5%. And this discordance is because of the way obesity is measured. We measure obesity by BMI, that is the weight in kilogram divided by height in meter squared. And this is not a very good way of measuring obesity, and I'll come to that, cover that in a little bit of detail. Because when you define obesity-related cancer, we have to define obesity first, and then say, okay, this is obese person has got cancer because of obesity. So BMI is not a very good way of measuring it, and I'll come to that a little later. And this is the cause of death. What is the risk factor for death? And obesity is the fourth highest. For 5 million people have obesity every year, and that is related, of course, to top two also. High blood pressure, high blood sugar is also because of obesity. In case you are interested in these neat charts, which you can use in your presentation, you go to this healthdata.org. It's a very useful website. Very nice interactive graphics are available there. Now, the cause of obesity. Why do people get obese? Well, that when we were doing medicine, and probably you also doing medicine, it used to be fairly simple. People eat too much and don't work out, don't exercise enough. That used to be the standard teaching, and that's what we nowadays we talk to a patient. Oh, you should cut down on your diet and you should walk more, exercise more. It's not really so simple, and I'll come to that. So this is a chart showing the percentage of obese people versus the calories they are taking. And as you can see, the available calories have increased 2,200 kilocalories in 1960s to now 2,800. That seems to show people are obese because they are eating more. However, it's not so simple as that. As you can, sorry, this is a problem.
Ajit?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Can you go a bit slow so that everybody will understand? Because there's some lag while you are speaking. So if you go a bit slow, it will be more audible.
I'll go a little slow. Sure. Okay, I'll do that. Okay. So this shows obesity on the vertical axis, number of percentage of people who are overweight or obese, and on the horizontal axis it shows the availability of calories. Calories are available more nowadays. In the 1960s, it used to be 2,200 kilocalorie per person. By 2013, it had increased to 2,800. But you can see doesn't always correlate. For instance, 2,600 calories. In India, about 20% of people are obese. But when you go to South America, almost 50% of people are obese in the same calories, which is quite, it's not so simple, it doesn't mean, so it means that just eating calories doesn't make you fat. And if you take the people who are between 60 to 70% obese, the countries where the people are 60 to 70% obese, you can see that the spread of calories is very high. Some of them eat 2,600, some of them eat 3,600. So the obesity doesn't really correlate with the calorie intake. And this, of course, is the famous David, who went a 6-month tour of America and came back quite obese, because America has got what's called a obesogenic environment. So this was examined in UK in a 1995 paper, and this panel, the center panel, shows the rates of obesity have been going up, while actually the energy intake and the fat intake have been coming down. And this bar graph also shows the same thing. The calorie intake have been coming down since 1950s, but the obesity rates have been going up. So he thought it is because of people are having more sloth. They're not exercising enough, you're watching more TV and having more carbs. But again, this is not really true. Although energy intake has been coming down, it does not relate to exercise. And this has been shown by this very nice study. The red circle shows a tribe in Africa called the Hadza. The blue one shows a farming community in Bolivia, all hardworking people. And the gray ones are the usual Western people. As you can see, there is no correlation between the daily expenditure of calories or the fat fats. You're a hunter-gatherer, or whether you're a farmer or you're Western with sloth, there is no relation between energy expenditure or your body weight. And the same study, they also showed there is no correlation between physical activity and body fat. As you can see, the scatter plots, the circles are all scattered all over the place. So it's not so simple that you eat more or you exercise less, you become fat. And there is a reason why. And this is, now people feel it's more because of genetics. These are both litter mates. This is called the OB mouse or obese mouse. This is found in Jackson lab. They tested this. They found this mouse is deficient in a hormone called leptin. I don't have time to go through the details of the leptin. Basically, it's a hormone produced by the adipose tissue, and it tells the brain that there is enough storage of fat in the body. And if you are deficient in leptin, you become fat. So there is a simple explanation for obesity, but unfortunately, that applies only to very few people. For instance, these obese mice, if you give leptin, it becomes thin. So this is the one which has got placebo, and this is the one which got leptin and has become thin. But most of the people are not deficient in leptin. There are few rare cases, like this small boy who was at the age of 4, he was like 90 pounds, almost 45 kilos. And when he was given leptin, he lost weight and he's become thin. There are very few families who are like this. Most of the people are not leptin deficient. But it shows that genetics play a part. In fact, when they have done GWS, that is genome-wide association studies, they found that obesity is one of the most highly heritable conditions, much more heritable than schizophrenia or diabetes or hypertension or alcoholism. It's kind of surprising. So now people believe that it's more of a genetic disorder than really more of than highly heritable. There are two reasons about what causes obesity. One was what called calorie in, calorie out, or the first law of thermodynamics, that energy cannot be produced or destroyed. If you take a calorie, unless you spend it, you will become fat. The second one is called the carbohydrate insulin model. I'm sorry I'm belaboring a bit about obesity, but it's important to understand what causes obesity so that you can have some sort of idea what causes obesity-related cancers. So the conventional view of obesity is what we all been taught, is that reaching a healthy diet is a balancing act. You have to balance your energy in and energy out. If you eat too much, and this is what essentially, if you eat too much and if you don't spend enough energy, there's a lot of circulating fuels, glucose and lipids, and that leads to fat storage and you become fat. I told you, like as I told you before, this theory is not really correct. when you try to lose weight, actually your energy expenditure comes down, and that's why you find it very difficult to lose weight. In a day, there's only limited amount of calories that you can expend, and they found that in children, give them games in school, they don't exercise at home, and apparently everybody has got a set point where it defends your level of body fat. You cannot lose more weight than that. So the new theory is that it's called the carbohydrate insulin model. What they say is everybody has a tendency for fat storage. There is some reason why people tend to store fat, and because the circulating fuels, glucose and lipids in the blood is low, and that makes you more hungry, and that makes you more fatigue and tendency to exercise less. The question is, of course, what makes you store more fat, and that is thought to be because of high levels of insulin. It is thought that the modern diet, lots of things in the diet, makes your insulin level very high, and that makes all the circulating glucose and lipids go into the fat tissue. It is stored in the fat, and that makes you more hungry and reduces the energy expenditure, and that is the cause, high insulin levels. And this is basically shown in this one. If you eat too much refined carbohydrates, which is sugar, some chemical squeezogens, which includes things like linoleic acid, it increases the insulin secretion. That leads to fat storage. It reduces the circulating fuels, which leads to increased hunger and fatigue, and that is the main cause of obesity. So basically, it is insulin, and that is clearly shown in this picture. This is a patient before insulin became available, total emaciated weight loss, and once she was started on insulin, she started putting on weight. To put it another way, this is OGT, glucose tolerance test, done over since 1970 onwards. As you can see, the glucose level appear to be normal, but if you test the insulin of these people, you'll find the insulin levels have been going up just to make this glucose normal. So the insulin levels are actually 4 times higher now than what it was in 1970s. We all have very high insulin levels. Although our glucose level may be normal, that is kept normal because we have very high insulin levels, almost 4 times higher than before. Bottom line, insulin is a fat storage hormone. We tend to think of it as something to keep the glucose low. It is meant to keep the fat stored. Unfortunately, we have all high insulin levels. And why is it high? Because we take a lot of sugar, we take a lot of ultra-processed food. It's estimated that there are about 88,000 ultra-processed food available in the supermarket. More than 80% contain sugar. Plus, there's a tendency to snack frequently, which keeps the insulin level high. So all these diets, this high protein ketogenic diet or this intermittent fasting, they all meant to keep the insulin level low. Bottom line, you want to keep the insulin, you want to lose weight, you got to keep your insulin level low. There are a lot of YouTube videos on this. I find it fascinating. These are all scientists who talk on why insulin is bad for you. Maybe everybody can check any of them. I particularly like Jason Fung. This is a good talk on obesity. And this lady, she's given this lecture on why it's raised insulin level. Unfortunately, insulin level is increased even with artificial sweetness. So although we may take Diet Coke, that also increases your insulin level, and that also can make you obese. And there are other references you can read about why insulin is a cause of obesity. It is all over the place. There are plenty of articles on this. There's also a guy called Joe Kraft who found the Kraft test. So instead of checking for after taking glucose, instead of checking glucose level, he checked the insulin level, and he found that this is the pattern 1 where the insulin level goes a little higher, and the pattern where although the glucose level is normal, these are the people who are likely to go on to develop diabetes. So insulin is bad for you. Coming to measuring obesity, I told you the standard way is BMI, which is basically kilogram divided by meter square. And overweight is when you're more than 25 of BMI, and obesity is when you're more than 30. It is a very bad measure of obesity, and the reason is this. Suppose you take a person who is 188 centimeter tall and weighs about 120 kilos, his BMI is 33. I told you that any BMI more than 30 is obese. So this person is clearly obese. I don't think if you tell Rock that he's obese, he's going to like it. So the point is that BMI does not measure the fat; it measures the whole body, including the muscles. So very muscular person could be labeled as obese based on BMI. And then the reason is that fat is of different types. Fat can be white fat, which is a storage fat, which is good for you. You have more white fat, that is good. It is stored. Brown fat is also good for you. It expands the. It is a fat which causes is responsible for thermogenesis, keeping your body warm. And when you do a PET scan, you find a lot of brown fat, in between your interscapular region. And the more brown fat you have, that's good for you. The distribution of fat is also important. Subcutaneous fat is good. You can have as much subcutaneous white fat as you want, and you'll be perfectly healthy, although your BMI may be sky high. But if you don't have subcutaneous fat, but you have a lot of visceral fat, that is abdominal fat, that's very bad. And the worst is ectopic fat, that is fat stored in muscle and liver. So I suggest that all of you read this particular article, came about 5 years ago. Why ectopic fat stored in muscle or liver causes insulin resistance, hyperglycemia, dyslipidemia, cardiometabolic disorders. Ectopic fat is really bad. You can measure fat like this. You do an MRI and you see the first people are the same, but this person has got a lot of fat and hardly any liver fat, which is healthy fat. This person has got less subcutaneous fat, but more of visceral fat. Oops. And that is very bad fat to have. More visceral fat is what we call tophi. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside. So subcutaneous fat is good, visceral fat is bad, liver fat is very bad. Or you can also do MRI to find that out. So the first person is obese, got a lot of subcutaneous fat, but it does not have liver fat, just healthy fat. Because obese with high liver fat, this guy is thin with a lot of liver fat, which is the worst. You have noticed that I know one called oncologist who is very thin, but he's a diabetic. And that is because he's got a very fatty liver, or whatever, that's genetic reason, and that is bad fat. I had a friend who's a pediatrician, very thin, tall guy, fatty liver, died of liver failure. So we tend to think of obesity as a simple, at 18 BMI, between 18 to 25, you are normal, and 30 is obese. But it's not that. You could be thin outside, fat inside because of liver fat. You could have normal body BMI, but with high body fat. Or you may be fat, but because you're basically subcutaneous fat, you may be quite healthy. So it's quite a spectrum. BMI may not be applicable to Indians, and the reason is Indians have a tendency to store fat around the waist. I sort of compare it to the camel hump. The Indian pot belly is something like the camel hump. There are different methods of fat storage. The hump is really made of fat. If there is subcutaneous fat in tropical climate, you'll probably die of heat stroke. So in tropical climates, there's a tendency to store the fat around the waist. This does not change the BMI. So if you measure BMI, and the same BMI, Asians, blacks, Hispanics, all from tropical regions have more metabolic syndrome than whites, more diabetes, so on and so forth, because they are more prone to abdominal obesity, visceral fat. We don't know whether they are more prone to obesity-related cancers, and that would be a good research topic. Do we have better alternatives? We have waist to hip ratio, but the ratio which is as good as the DEXA scan is called the relative fat mass. You've got a slightly complicated way of measuring it, but basically you need the height in the waist. And there is all MD calculators have got this. So if anybody planning to do a research on obesity-related cancers, you should measure the relative fat mass. And of course, ultrasound liver for the fatty liver. So to sum this part up, subcutaneous fat is actually protective. Visceral fat is not good. Muscle fat is bad. And liver fat is the worst because of insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, metabolic syndrome. Does it lead to cancer? It's a good research topic. One of you can take it up. Coming to my topic, obesity-related cancer, or I call it ORC. And this guy in the beginning is General Balg of the ORC army. If you have watched the Lord of Rings, he is in the opposition. So he is one of the orcs. This is the same as obesity-related cancer. In 2014, the IARC came out with this paper in NEJM on body fatness and cancer, and they said 14 types of cancers are related to obesity. They didn't say obesity causes it, they said it's associated. So stomach, esophagus, colon, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, uterus, ovary, kidney, thyroid. These are all obesity related. There are 14 of them. But after that, more and more associations are coming, including prostate, urinary bladder, neuroendocrine tumors, and lung cancers. As you can see, the biggest association relative risk is 4.8 with esophageal adenocarcinoma. The rest is all about 1.8, 1.8. And uterine cancer, especially endometrioid uterine cancer, is very commonly associated with obesity. Also, kidney cancer is another one which is related to obesity. If you ask, is it associated or is it a cause? So for any environmental toxin, whether you want to know whether it is associated with the cancer or is it causing a cancer, there's a criteria called Bradford-Hill criteria. And there are about 9 things that you 9 variables that you have to consider. First is the association. Is there a difference between exposed and non-exposed? Yes. For some types of cancer, obese people get it more than thin people. Is it consistent? Observed by different people at different places? Yes, this relation is consistent. Is it specific? But not very specific, but it is there. Is it temporal? That means, does the exposure come before the disease? Obviously, yes. You become obese first before you get the cancer. Is there a dose response curve? Yes, that has been proven with breast cancer. Is it biologically possible? Yes. Obesity, you can, in cell lines and all, you can prove that obesity causes, carcinogenesis. Is it coherent? But we need further investigation for that. Does intervention change outcome? Yes. If you do a bariatric surgery, the risk of cancer has come down. And does similar agents cause similar disease? It's a unique thing, so we cannot comment on that. But basically, any environmental factor, whether you have to know whether it associated or causes cancer, this is the criteria which you have to fulfill. It's something like Robert Koch's criteria for tuberculosis. This is for cancer, and this important to know this. For any oncologist, you should know this. Basically, to have cancer, you need to have proliferation and mutation. There are, of course, some mutations, driver mutation, which causes proliferation, but basically a cancer is a 2-hit thing. You need to have proliferating cell amount and some mutations. And so single thing never causes cancer. You can say that Epstein-Barr virus causes Burkitt's lymphoma. That is not true, because it does cause, of course, but a lot of us are affected with Epstein-Barr virus. We all don't get cancers or Hodgkin disease or Burkitt's, whatever. So there has to be more than one reason why cancer is caused. So obesity per se obviously is not causing. There must be some additional factors. Some mechanisms are easy to understand. Endometrial and breast cancer can be because of high estrogen levels produced in the adipose. We know that you use estrogen in adipose tissue. Gallbladder cancer could be because of cholesterol stones. Liver cancer, it is there because of fatty liver. And gastroesophageal cancer, I told you that's one of the commonest high factors is because of reflux, because of high visceral fat. These are the easy to understand mechanisms, but a lot of them we don't know why it causes. And the postulated ones is, of course, one is that because of high levels of insulin. This is a proliferative, and it's one of the pathways I'll show you. High levels of insulin drives the cell cycle. Adipose tissue is actually a very inflammatory tissue. In fact, there are more immune cells in the adipose tissue than adipocytes. And these immune cells release a lot of cytokines, which causes inflammation, which is supposed to be one of the causes of cancer. Fat people have got different microbiome in the gut, and that has been linked to cancer of colon, liver, and pancreas, basically GI cancers. And this is basic mechanism which has been postulated, and still a lot of research going on. Raised insulin, chronic inflammation in the adipose tissue, and it's in the gut microbiome. This is one of the most important pathways that you should remember. I think last time I checked, there are about 22 pathways all over the body. You can go to KEGG and they will tell you all the pathways. But this is the most important pathway that you should remember, and that is the insulin pathway. Basically, insulin or IGF attaches to the receptor, and then there is PA3 kinase, there's AKT. This is one of the pathways, and the other side is the MAP kinase pathway. Both are proliferative pathways, and they drive a lot of cancers. Unfortunately, we have not been able to find a single gene abnormality in all cancers. They have done this gene-wide associated study of obesity, and they have found like almost 400 genes which may be responsible for obesity. But there's been not a single study done for, at least I couldn't find one done for obesity-related cancers, and that's a good topic for research. They have found consistently there is altered expression of two genes, fatty acid synthase, FASN, and FTO. Fat and obesity are related, obesity-associated gene, and I'll come to that a little later. There's also something called mutational signature, and this could be a short note for you guys going for exams. Basically, it says that if there is a toxin and that causes cancer, it causes a specific pattern of gene abnormalities. It's called a mutational signature. This paper, they did this, exposed of stem cells to toxins, aldehydes, aromatic amines, and they did the PCR on that and did the analysis, and they found that 41 of the 71 agents produced a specific mutational signature. So if you have a cancer, theoretically, if you have a cancer, you check that for a mutational signature and you find a specific signature of, say, aflatoxin, you say, aha, aflatoxin caused this cancer. Again, it's not so simple as that. There could be, but we know that smoking causes a specific mutational signature. So if you think a cancer is caused due to smoke or tobacco, you can check for this particular mutational signature. Implications of obesity-related cancer are many, and I will broadly cover them in this. And prevention, screening, prognosis, treatment consideration, which is important for you. So prevention. If you lose weight, and the best way to lose weight is bariatric surgery, hands down. I told you dietary weight loss is very difficult, almost impossible. But bariatric surgery is very simple. And you see, if you do bariatric surgery, whether any bariatric surgery or gastric bypass, the risk of cancer drops dramatically. So it's not only good for control of diabetes, it also improves your cancer control. Diet, I told you, is very difficult. There is one study called WINS. This is called Women's Interventional Nutrition Study. So these are patients with early breast cancer who were put on a diet. With a lot of difficulty, they lost about 6 pounds of weight. And those who lost weight did have a reduction in the risk of relapse. So the bottom line is that if you have a fat patient with a breast cancer or any of these obesity-related cancer, you must insist that they lose weight, and counseling should be given seriously. If a smoker comes to you with a lung cancer, you will tell him to stop smoking, right? There is no reason when an obese person comes to you with a cancer that you should not tell him to lose weight. You should tell him or her that you must lose weight. If you lose weight, your chance of the cancer coming back is much, much reduced. If required, send them for a bariatric surgery and they will thank you for that. Lose weight. For screening fatty liver, if you have fatty liver, you are generally advised to screen for HCC, and that is done by the gastroenterologist. But it's also know that fatty liver, the chance of extrahepatic cancers are also very high. I find it very, the HCC is maximum when the patient is cirrhotic, but it can happen in non-cirrhotic liver also. There is an Indian drug, by the way, for fatty liver. You can check it up. Zydus has made it. I think they have done a phase 3 trial called Evidence, and they found that it reduces the fat in the liver. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that if a person comes to you with fatty liver, you have to screen for, of course, HCC, but you also think of extrahepatic, other obesity-related cancer, which can be extrahepatic. This is a very good research topic. I find a lot of thin people who got fatty liver who got cancer. I really think somebody should look into this. There is something which is driving both the fatty liver as well as the cancers, and it could be a good research topic. These are the extrahepatic cancers. This is data from Mayo Clinic. Of course, liver cancers are high, but they also get cancers of colon, pancreas, stomach, breast, uterus, so on and so forth. So there's no recommendation yet that they should be screened for this, but that would be some option sometime in future. Mortality increases if you're obese and you've got cancer. You can see the relative risk of death is increased in all types of cancer, including prostate, gallbladder. If you're fat and you're a man, you're 50% of death and give 60% increase of death. You need to lose weight. If you have got cancer, you really need to lose weight. Obesity not only increases the risk of getting breast cancer, but also lower survival, about 33%. This was published in JCO about a couple of years back. And this is the meta-analysis of 82 studies. It says that for each 5 kilo increase in BMI, there is almost 30% increase in breast cancer specific mortality, as well as, of course, overall mortality because of other conditions like diabetes. Please, guys, if a fat patient comes to you, make them lose weight. Bottom line, they will thank you for it. Also, make sure they have proper diabetic control. We tend to sort of ignore the glucose level thing. Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's not my headache. It is the headache. So then on the right side, this is the patients who have hemoglobin of less than 130 and more than 130. You see the difference in survival. Median survival drops dramatically if the glucose control is low. Metformin is, by the way, it actually improves survival, so it's one of the major drugs you should use. Also, high insulin levels. If the insulin level is high, which we normally don't check, this is the insulin level is high, the survival drops. Unfortunately, we don't check insulin levels. I think that's a good study which you can do very easily. Nowadays, it's not very difficult to get insulin levels. Surprisingly, this the relation between obesity and death is not that straightforward. There's something called obesity paradox, and that's especially common in renal cell carcinoma. The risk of renal cell carcinoma increases for every 5 increase in BMI, it increases by about 20 to 30%. But surprisingly, they have better prognosis. The obese people actually survive better than the normal people. So the obese people are somewhere here, obese and overweight is here, normal is here. If you have normal weight and renal cell cancer, you have a higher chance of dying. Nobody knows why this is. There is a recent paper in Lancet in December, actually. Peritumoral tissue has got some differences. It's an interesting thing. It's worth checking too. In treatment consideration, you should know that patients who are getting chemotherapy may not respond the same as normal people. Adipose tissue actually protects the cancer cells. It upregulates the efflux pump. It's called major wall protein. It upregulates and just keeps pumping the chemotherapy out. It also tends to sequester chemotherapy drugs so that it actually doesn't go to the cancer cell. This is especially true for adriamycin. Plus, we have difficulty in giving some chemotherapy drugs because of overlapping toxicities. A VEGF inhibitor obese patient may have hypertension, hyperglycemia. Trastuzumab is more toxic in obese people, so you really got to be careful. But the most important thing is what we do, which is very bad. That is, we tend to cap the dose. You look at a person who's 2 meters square and say, oh no, he cannot tolerate so much adriamycin. Let us reduce the dose of adriamycin. That is a very bad idea. So this is a study which is done, and the blue one shows the actual relative dose intensity. The brown one shows the unplanned reduction, and the yellow one shows the planned reduction. As you can see, the patients become more and more obese. We tend to reduce the dose and give them much less than what is required. We know from basic oncology, if the RDA is less than 85%, survival drops. You see, an obese person is getting at less than that, he's getting around 75% of the actual required dose. That will affect the survival. So please, guys, don't reduce the dose. The dose should be as per the actual BSA, and this ASCO guidelines to guide you on this. Give the full dose based on the actual body weight, especially when the goal of treatment is cure. The dose may look horribly high, but that's what the pharmacology tells us, that they will tolerate the dose and the side effects will be as same as any person. And there's guidelines to protect you in case of legal problems. So you should full dose. If you want concerned about survival, give the full dose. But targeted therapy, there are some available. I mean, they are still in investigation. I told you there are two genes, FASN, fatty acid synthase gene, and FTO gene. So there are targeted therapies for that. Orlistat is one. Entacapone is actually used for Parkinson's. And you can see if you, this is studies in mice, it actually increases the, energy expenditure and make them lose weight. They have not yet been tried in cancer cases, but of course, when you find these genes are overexpressed. If they are in obesity-related cancer, probably these drugs will come specific for that. I told you this is one of the most common pathways which you should know about. Insulin going to PI3K, going to AKT, going to mTOR. And we have drugs which block it at each level. You know, alpelisib for PI3K, ipatasertib, everolimus, so on and so forth. There are specific drugs. We do not know whether they work better. Oh, somebody's mic is on. We don't know whether these drugs work better in obesity-related cancer. Theoretically, it should. Again, guys, good place. Drugs are coming. Alpelisib will be coming in a big way. It's worth finding out whether they work better in obese people. Because the problem with blocking any of this pathway is that the insulin works less. You know, the pathway is blocked, insulin becomes less, they become hyperglycemic. When you become hyperglycemic, insulin further increases, again drives the proliferation, and the survival goes down. So one of the important thing is to, again, if you are using any of this drug, you should control the hyperglycemia. The best way to control is with the SGLT2 inhibitors, all those forgotten the names, glutamides and stuff like that, or a ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diet actually improves the survival. Paradoxically, if you're obese, immunotherapy actually works better. It's very interesting. This is 4 trials in 2000 using of atezolizumab in non-small cell lung cancer. As you can see, if you're obese, your survival is much better than if you are not obese. If you're using docetaxel, it doesn't make any difference. The survival is exactly the same. But if you're using atezolizumab, it helps that you're obese. I don't suggest that you should become fat before using atezolizumab, but just a retrospective finding. There's no real explanation for it. So, like the obesity paradox of renal cell cancer, in immunotherapy also there is a paradox. And this paradox has been seen in other conditions also, in melanomas and RCC. If you are obese, your survival is much better with immunotherapy. No real explanation why this is so. The last part, again a good research topic, is something which we call sarcopenic obesity. So this is CT scan of 2 people. Both of them have BMI of more than 30. But here you can see the muscle, psoas muscle done at L3 is very limited, while here he's got lots of psoas muscle. This patient is sarcopenic. The one with the less muscle is sarcopenic, and that is a bad prognostic factor. If you are obese and sarcopenic, that's even worse. So your radiologist can measure this for you to L3 and tell you how much of obesity versus how much of muscle mass is there. Everybody gets a CT scan. Very easy research topic. You can easily go to the baseline CT scan, measure the skeletal muscle, and just assess the prognosis. Take 200 cases of breast cancer. You have a very easy thesis here. So this is defined as skeletal muscle index at L3, and that is laid down values. In this particular study, which is pancreatic carcinoma, if you are sarcopenic obesity, you are sarcopenic reduced, but if you are sarcopenic and it reduces it much worse, 14 versus 23 months. Interesting topic. So I will stop here. The cause of obesity is very fascinating, and I think you can take the slides from Padmaj. There are lots of people on YouTube which will tell you, especially this carbohydrate insulin model, why it's so important and why insulin is so important. And if you want to lose weight, you need to keep your insulin very, very, very low. It includes intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet, whatever. We think the liver fat is bad, or we think the ectopic fat is bad. That is a good opportunity for research. We have at least 13 obesity-related cancers and maybe more. Insulin appears to play a major role, and that insulin, PI3K, AKT, mTOR pathway seems to be the one which is responsible for many of these cancers. Obese cancer patients need a slightly different approach. And again, I'm emphasizing this. Please control the weight, please control the glycemia. That will improve their survival much more than any of these fancy TKIs. Chemotherapy dosing, don't cap the dose, give them as per actual weight, and there's ASCO guidelines to protect you. And there are plenty of research opportunities in this subject. Anybody looking for a this DNB thesis, great opportunity here. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. And if there are any questions, I'm not sure Padmaj can unmute you. Padmaj, I hope you're not fallen asleep.
No. I think thank you very much, Ajit, for a very engaging talk. You have beautifully covered in a very lucid way about this me and as you rightly said in the last the question paper by DNB, there was a question on this obesity related cancers in the FAT examination.
Okay. Yeah, I guess.
And along with that,
okay.
Yeah, and along with that, what you mentioned, the 2-3 things which are very important: glycemic control, which improves survival because of in itself, in addition to tolerance to chemotherapy, and not capping the dose, especially in curative intent. So I think that's what is important. We have time for questions. If anybody wants to ask any questions to Dr. Ajit Venur, you're welcome. You can start now. If there are no questions, let me see if there's anything on the chat. Any questions, guys?
I have given my email address. If anything is required, you can always email me. If you want any of the references or stuff like that, I can always send you that.
I want to ask you one thing. After stopping the smoking, it's usually said that the risk of the cancer coming down to the baseline usually takes about 7 years or so, or more than that. I mean, so is there something like this with obesity? If somebody does bariatric surgery, does the risk of the malignancy drops immediately, or how does it work? Any idea on this?
There are two things. One is the risk of developing a cancer and the risk of dying of cancer. So the risk of developing a cancer drops almost immediately. You can see that, I think I showed you that slide where where the obese patients underwent bariatric surgery, and the drop in is quite dramatic. It's almost immediate. Not surprising, the weight loss happens almost immediately, and it doesn't depend on the patient, dieting and all that stuff. It is some hormonal stuff basically make them lose weight, and the risk of cancer comes down. With the risk of relapse, unfortunately, there is no study on, at least no large study on, cancer patients, obese cancer patient undergoing bariatric surgery and reducing the risk of relapse. That study has not been done. There is the last one I saw, meta-analysis, which basically collected several small case studies together. Of course, there is reduced risk of relapse, but that time period I cannot tell you how quickly it dropped. That I cannot tell you because the study is very small study. But I think it is very important that the patients be made aware. The patients be made aware that obesity, overweight it's not a laughing matter. Unfortunately, when you start discussing this with the patient, they start laughing. It's smoking. You have to be very responsible. This is you are going to die because of your fat. Then probably they'll take it seriously.
Yeah, I think this is very important, and then the data has made it very clear. I mean, I usually emphasize my patients on very good glycemic control, but the point I consider that was purely from the glycemic control itself and the diabetic complications. I mean, this is a very important part that in itself is going to improve the survival. I mean, that's what is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually, there is one basic slide on that, which I didn't want to belabor, but hyperglycemia itself drives tumor proliferation. And that's the critical reason why you have to control be tight.
Yes, there's one more question I have. There's a current epidemic of COVID-19. The data about COVID-19 and malignancy, what happens in cancer patients is not very clear, except for the data which is just recently published in Lancet, the data from Hong Kong and China, where a fraction of patients was the cancer patients, and the inference from the limited study was that patients who are elderly, who have hematological malignancies, patients who are on significantly immunosuppressive chemotherapy, and those post-transplant are at increased risk of contracting and then having complications. Any idea about obese cancer patients? What happens about the COVID-19?
I'm sorry, I didn't even think of it that way.
Right now,
yeah. Sorry, I cannot help you in that.
Because now
yeah, go ahead.
I know there's a lot of there's no data on this, and we probably have to work on that. Yeah.
Yeah, this leukemia. I remember that some coach of the Brazilian, I think, junior team, he also died. Young guy, but he died because he was. I think he was a leukemic patient or something like that. The cancer patient seems to have a, despite whatever the age, they seem to have a less good outcome. So the question, I don't know whether this was discussed, whether cancer patients should stop the treatment during this epidemic or continue. What was the recommendation? I saw there was one statement sent out by ICON and all those people. What is that? Continue treatment, stop treatment?
Yeah, we have just released a statement today. No, the advisory which has been given is we should discuss with the patient about, especially about palliative chemotherapy, and they need to weigh the risk of contracting the COVID-19 versus increased risk of relapse after stopping, and then the patient should take a call about that. But you should be really discussing with them.
Okay, that makes sense. Interesting, yeah. By theoretically, I'm thinking that most of the chemotherapy drugs causes neutropenia and not lymphopenia, and viruses are affect more lymphopenic patients. So at least for solid tumors, whether there is a need to stop, I can understand leukemias, but solid tumors, whether they need to stop or not. But yeah, you're right. There can't be much data in this. Okay. Anyway, interesting. Thank you, guys.
What you're saying makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much, Ajit. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Dr. Ajit is there? Yeah, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Dr.
I can hear
Ajit.
you.
I'm Dr. Prashant, sir, from Calicut, MPR. It was a very extensively covered topic.
Hi, Prashant.
I'll ask you one doubt, sir. Basically, I always feel that our Indians has a less BSA. That is the reason that they are not tolerating any of the chemotherapy like the Western people. So all this carcinogenesis part I understand, but I feel why an 80-year-old person in a Western country is tolerating so easily, our 60-year-old is not tolerating, is just because of the low BSA. So I think so in a part, we should encourage some BMI. We should ask them to gain more weight, they should eat. Because of our normal diet, which is something or a poverty gene, whatever you can attribute it to, your take on that. Because even our 60-year-old lung, we are not able to treat half of the people. Any take on that? It may not be related to your topic, but I'm...
No, I understand that. The point is that if they gain weight, they should gain muscle weight, not fat. They just eat and become fat, and Indians have a tendency to put on weight around the waist. That is visceral fat. Okay. That makes the prognosis worse. So I think if they, by all methods, yes, they should exercise, put on muscle mass. I'm absolutely for that. But putting on, just eating and putting on weight and becoming what I said the last, sarcopenic obesity, their muscle mass is low and they are fat, their prognosis actually goes down.
Okay.
So that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, Ajit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll chip in over here about the question of BSA. I mean, we all are aware that BSA is not the best way to calculate the drug doses.
Yeah.
The formula which we use for BSA calculation is developed from a data of some 12 or 13 patients. That's the way the formula was developed. And the idea, and the idea of using BSA was that when we are transferring the doses in the phase 1 clinical trials from the animal models to the humans, this transition was easier based on BSA. So the idea was the body metabolism of the drugs would be proportionate to the body surface area, which is not actually true. And though we conventionally keep on treating patients with body surface area, there is no scientific basis on that. So a lot of drugs now we are coming to fixed weight, fixed doses, or on AUC, depending on AUC, and then each drug may have, if you are aware or not, the initial approval, FDA approval for trastuzumab was based on not per kg, but it was a fixed dose approval. And then suddenly with some unpublished data from Roche, it was increased to per kg. So, I mean, just because you asked this, Dr. Nair, you asked this question about the
correct,
BSA,
sir, correct.
It's a pander of jokes. So, what I think the best way probably is to titrate your dose with the toxicity.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's
correct, sir. That's a correct take. Correct.
Yeah, it's a good point. Previously, I think for Hodgkins, they used to. Previously, for Hodgkins, I think. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Previously, for Hodgkins, I think they used to do that. They used to increase the dose, the toxicity, and then increase the toxicity and then keep it. But those good habits are gone away.
Our DAPOC, we essentially do the same thing. DAPOC. We keep on increasing and then monitor and titrate the dose to the Nadir ANC. Yeah.
As per each tolerance, correct.
Great. Thanks, Padmaj. That was very nice.
So, I think, thank you very much, Ajit. It was wonderful to have you, and we'll invite you for some other interesting topic sometime later. Thank you.
Yeah, specific topic. Yeah, but obesity is my absolute favorite. You know, the fatter you become, the more you think of losing weight, and then you try to find out why you cannot lose weight, and then you find out, oh, it's the insulin. You have to do something about it. Yeah. So,
Ajit, I know these people don't know. Yeah, these people don't know about your background. You are from a army. You've been a paratrooper, and then you've been a veteran who participated in the Sri Lankan war. I think people your interest in fitness is obviously understood.
Next time I shall blow my own trumpet. I'll give you all the pictures of Sri Lankan war and marathons and all those things. Yeah, but Purvesh sir, I don't know whether you know Purvesh sir. He does this something called Dikshit diet. Where you can eat all you want for 8 hours and then fast for the rest. Yeah, that basically is to keep the insulin level low. Yeah, the more you eat, the insulin level goes. Anyway.
Yeah, that's what a lot of Maharashtrians are doing right now. Yeah, thank you very much, Ajit. Good night.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Padmaj. Thank you.